People of Reddit, what is the loneliest thing you've ever done? Story 1. When I was in high school, I was bullied horribly. When I was about 13, the kids in my class invited me over to go for milkshakes and fries to celebrate the first day of Christmas break. I excitedly told my parents, and they were so happy for me. It seemed like I was finally making friends. Needless to say, they all stood me up. I was too scared to go home and tell my parents that once again I had fallen for their lies. So I stayed out by myself for a couple of hours, ate fries and drank a milkshake, and felt so alone. Obviously a horrible way to start Christmas break. Story 2. Basically, my past 5 years have been pretty much alone. I go out and meet people, but we never end up hanging out. I can chat people up and be funny and get phone numbers at bars. But when I call these people the weekend or the next weekend after to hang out, it never precipitates into anything. I guess when people sober up, they realize it might be awkward going out to get drinks with a complete stranger. Story 3. My neighbor was having a Super Bowl party with 5 different kinds of chili, which was the Super Bowl. But he didn't directly invite me, and I was too anxious to go alone, so I ended up driving over to Wendy's, picked up some chili, and ate that in my car, in the Wendy's parking lot, and waited until the Super Bowl game was over before going home. Story 4. When I started high school, I wasn't really friends with anybody. I knew a few guys from middle school, but that was about it. My sister and her friends who knew me were in grade 12 at the same school, so for the first month, I didn't have anyone to eat lunch with and didn't want to sit alone in the cafeteria where my sister and her friends could see that I didn't have any. She would no doubt worryingly tell my parents, and I didn't want them to become concerned about my inability to make friends. So I started eating my lunch in the washroom stall, and then secretly moved to eating it in the library. After about a month, I decided to go to the lunchroom because my teacher let us off early, about 10 minutes before the lunch bell. I figured I could go sit and eat my lunch quick before people got there. As I was eating, these black guys who were in my gym class came and sat next to me. It was their usual table. They lived in what you would call a hood in my city, although we don't really have a hood here, just a place of low-income families. And then soon the entire row filled up with guys from that same area, and they basically went on usual making jokes. They knew I was there, and even though I wasn't talking, they involved me. I ate lunch with them every day for the next 2 years after that. Story 5. During a long stretch of being single, I went to a strip club on Valentine's Day. All my friends had something going on, and I didn't want to be alone. One of the strippers gave me a kiss on my cheek. It left a big red lipstick mark on my face, and she whispered in my ear, "Hope that doesn't get you in any trouble." Yeah, right. If I had someone at home who cared about random lipstick on my face, do you think I would be at a strip club by myself on Valentine's Day? Ended up going home, getting blackout drunk by myself, and trash talk young kids on Call of Duty. Story 6. In middle school and high school, I legitimately ate lunch alone in bathroom stalls a few times when I had no one to eat with, but didn't want anyone to know. I wasn't disliked or bullied, just really shy and basically totally unwilling to make the first move in friendships, ever. Story 7. When I found out that my wife was cheating on me and I was laying on the kitchen floor crying, looking through my phone for someone to call and realizing that no one was a good enough friend or even family member to call when the chips were down. Story 8. I once walked into a Dairy Queen wanting a sundae. Not knowing if I wanted strawberry or chocolate, I was a little fat ass and got both. When the girl handed me the sundaes, she asked if I wanted 1 spoon or 2. I told her, 2 please, it's not like they're both for me. She laughed. I went home and ate both sundaes. I felt terrible, but God, they were good. Story 9. I wasn't going to be able to get away from my computer for a long time, so I ordered 2 footlongs at Subway. I got 2 different sandwiches, one for lunch and one for dinner, because who the hell wants to eat the same thing twice? Then, afterwards, I went to McDonald's to get some wraps for a late-night snack. The guy made a comment about the food I already had. Apparently the wraps were for my brother and the sandwiches were for my girlfriend. My girlfriend is out of town, and I don't have a brother. Story 10. I rented out a restaurant that housed over 70 people after coming back from deployment, so I could spend time with all my friends and family in one place. After having announced the event for over 3 weeks, nobody showed up. Having sat there for over 2 hours waiting, I just got up and left. Nobody called or texted to cancel. Now, a little more than a year later, I've moved to a new location and made new friends. I've also met the love of my life, now my fiancée, and we're scheduled to get married on August 22nd. It was a very unfortunate day that I still think about, but I regret none of it, because had anything been different, I probably would have not met the woman I am to marry. I also have the best man a guy could ask for, who I happened to meet after the move. So I think it was a good turning point for me. Story 11. When I ordered 2 burritos at Chipotle, for the second order I always pull out my phone and pretend I'm reading what someone else wants on theirs. And sometimes afterwards, I'll sit in my car and watch Netflix on my phone while I eat them. Story 12. My loneliest moment occurred about 2 years ago. It was during the summer, and I had gotten 2 free tickets to go to a local Renaissance fair. I did the only thoughtful thing I could think of. I asked my girlfriend of several years if she wanted to go. She was a teacher and claimed that she was too busy preparing for the school year, but she kept giving me non-committal responses and kind of stalling out hope for me still. So I asked her if she wanted to go on Friday night. Saturday came and went. I asked again if she would be down to go for Sunday for an hour or two, just to do something out of the house. The tickets were free, so I didn't really care if we stayed for a short amount of time or a long time. She claimed again that she was just too busy, after I even offered to come help her, and she still wouldn't give me a firm answer. Sunday rolled around and I asked again. She gave me the same routine. It was too short notice by this point to invite anyone else, so I ended up going to the fair by myself. While I was walking up to the admission gate to get in, I saw a younger couple getting ready to pay for their tickets. I still had the extra one, so I gave it to the couple. They seemed genuinely happy. The situation ignited an intense feeling of sadness in me. I spent an hour or two wandering around the fair alone. I wasn't happy and I knew it. Less than a week later, I was single, by my own choosing. Story 13. The saddest moment in my life that has resulted from me living by myself these past 5 years was when I was at my parents' house playing Legos with my 4-year-old nephew. When it was time for me to leave, I told him goodbye, and he was all, "You're leaving?" "Yeah, Oliver, I have to go home." "Why? Who's missing you?" "Nobody, Oliver." I think I broke a little that day. Story 14. When I would get upset, I used to vent at Cleverbot because I didn't want to bother my friends with my troubles. Also, the only Christmas present I ever get in the mail is from State Farm. Whenever I get it, it makes me feel kind of pathetic since the holidays already bring me down. They usually make me cry because my insurance company is the only entity that bothered to spend the 35 cents to say Merry Christmas. That's usually my lowest point of the year because I'm usually drunk from Halloween to Valentine's Day. Edit. The Cleverbot thing was in early 2013. I'm in a much better place now, and the outpouring of generally positive and encouraging messages is simultaneously surprising and touching. Thank you all, and well wishes. Story 15. I inadvertently sent a friend request on Facebook to the wrong person who happened to have the same name as the intended recipient. For whatever reason, that person accepted the request. This person and I have never interacted and don't live anywhere near each other. I now read all her updates and follow her life story. I've cheered during both her pregnancies, felt scared when she had to deliver one child 2 months early, cried when her husband was hurt in Afghanistan, and felt proud when she was accepted to medical school. I realized one day that I had invented a completely one-sided friendship with an online stranger, all while sitting alone at home in my pajamas. Story 16. I went for a run to clear my head after a rough week at work and a fight with my ex. It started to rain. I ran a little too hard and had to lean on a fence to catch my breath and stop myself from vomiting. A person walked by with their dog. The dog stopped and looked at me and gave a half wag with its tail while tilting its head quizzically as if to say, "You okay, bud?" I know I probably romanticized that moment and actually the dog was just like, "Bleh, hi, play, game?" But in that brief moment, it felt like the dog was the only living thing around me that week that bothered to actually look at me and actually give a shit. That was a very lonely moment, especially as the dog bounded away and I slowly walked back to my empty apartment. Story 17. I bought a Liverpool FC scarf because it has the team's motto, "You'll never walk alone," on it. I'm not even a Liverpool fan. I just like to take it with me when I go on long midnight walks. I may be alone, but I've got a damn scarf with a badass liverbird on it, so who cares? Story 18. I used to have a dog named Douglas. He was the child dog of an old relationship. When no one was around, I liked to sing random songs to him, replacing certain words with his name. Turn Down for Doug, Stairway to Douglas, Sweet Child of Doug, etc. Anyhow, after my ex and I broke up and parted ways, he got all depressed. Between work and graduate school and not really having a yard he could play in, I realized this wasn't the perfect environment for him. So, despite loving that dog more than most of the people in my life, I called my ex and decided to let her keep him. A little while after he was gone, I caught myself singing Sweet Child of Doug alone in my house, and I got really sad. This was months ago, and I'm still sad about it. And my ex and I aren't really on good terms, so it's not a good idea for me to go see him. I've been in a much different, much healthier relationship for a while now, and it's better for everyone. And I'm just glad that Doug's in a place that he can be taken care of. Also, here's a picture of Douglas, for those of you who are asking. He's a very small and anxious dog, and I'm a pretty big guy. We were kind of a cool duo. Story 19. When I moved, I had a lonely period where I hadn't had anyone to have a conversation with for around a year. Around my birthday during this time, I ate some food that I knew I couldn't, so I'd have to go to the emergency room, and the staff there would see my details, and someone would wish me a happy birthday. I'm in a much better place now than I was back then, but it was definitely the lowest point in my life. I have really severe social anxiety, and it was too overwhelming at the time to get out and meet people. It was a miserable experience. Story 20. My wife passed away a few years ago. One night after a lot of drinking and crying, I took one of her shirts, put it on a pillow, and curled up with it. She was my best friend, and I miss her every day. I turned 39 in January. It's been 4 years, and every day hurts. I've tried moving on, but I'm having trouble with the memories. It happened in the middle of the night, and we always slept touching. We started by cuddling and found our own comfortable positions as we drifted off to sleep. But we always slept touching, even if nothing more than just our feet. The night it happened, I woke up because I couldn't feel her anymore. I rolled over to find her locked in a silent scream with her back arched and a look of terror in her eyes. In an instant, I jolted up, and in that instant, she went limp. I couldn't find a pulse, so I called 911 and started CPR. The paramedics were terrible, and the police treated me like a criminal. I could hear EMS making rude jokes from the other room about her, and they cut her shirt off and were going to take her out topless. The police wouldn't even let me go in with her in the ambulance. They said a detective was coming to talk to me and just kept badgering me about where the drugs were. It took me 30 minutes to convince them that there were no drugs in the house. Finally, an officer came up to me and said the detective wasn't coming. As he walked away, he turned to tell me, by the way, they lost her on the way to the hospital. You see, my wife had an artificial heart valve. I could never find her bottle of blood thinners, so I'm assuming that something happened with that. Apparently, she stopped taking her medication and had been lying to me about it. No autopsy was done because her doctor said he would just sign off on the death certificate, which he then changed his mind about because my wife hadn't been in the office in 7 months, and the coroner ended up signing her certificate and listed her cause of death as valvular disease. It took me 3 days to even find where they had taken her, because all this happened on the Friday night before Labor Day, and no one was available to help me. But by that time, I was too torn up to get out of the house, and the mortician said it was probably for the best because she wasn't kept well. She wanted to be cremated, so that night was the last time I ever saw her. Since then, I've been hospitalized several times for depression, anxiety, and an unaliving attempt. My career has been ruined because I'm a wreck. I'm emotionally destroyed, and I'm living back at home with my parents. There's not one day that passes that some part, if not all of this, pours through my mind. Some days I can deal, but mostly I can't. I've tried to move on, but most women say I'm too emotional, so I decided to just occupy this room at my parents' place, watch TV, and simply try to make it through another day. Because that's all I feel I can really do at this point. Story 21. I dropped out of college when I was 19 because I'd played League of Legends too much and didn't focus on school enough. When I went to another university next year, I decided to focus on my studies and not to play League at all. I got along alright by myself, but every time my mom would call to ask if I'd made any friends, I would die a little inside because I hadn't. Furthermore, the friends I had been keeping in touch with were through League, and they were no longer there to talk to because I wasn't playing. I got pretty depressed. My birthday rolled around and I was alone. I got a call from my parents and my twin sister, but that was it. Around 8 p.m. one night, I was studying in the common room of my floor of the dorm, and someone came in and started playing League of Legends. I asked him how long he'd been playing for, and it turned out that he was pretty green. He'd only been playing for about a month. So I decided to help him out and teach him a few things. He became a pretty good player for his experience level, and we became really good friends. He's a super outgoing person, and through him, I met loads of people on campus. I got pretty lucky. Story 22. I ran into a stranger. They said, "Hey, I remember you. You were at that event wearing the steampunk hat. Good to see you again." I haven't gone to any notable events for years, and I've never worn an outfit like that, but this was the most interaction I'd gotten for a while. So I just went with it. We talked for 10 whole minutes about an event that I never went to. Story 23. I used to travel to Hawaii regularly for work. Sounds fun, but once you realize everyone is there with their family or lover and you're alone, it's the loneliest feeling that I've ever felt. It wasn't much better that I didn't have anyone waiting for me back home either for when I got back. Story 24. 3 years ago, my wife of 8 years suddenly left me. After a few months of voluntary seclusion, I decided on one final hurrah to my loneliness. I took my wedding ring, which cost €900, and a gold watch worth about €200, and took it to a gold buyer. I sold the ring for $29.95, leaving the gold buyer flabbergasted, understandably. Then, I went to the liquor store across the road and bought myself a bottle of Johnny Walker's, $29.95. I went back home, closed all the curtains, locked all my doors, and played my depressing music playlist on repeat, and turned off my phone. With all that done, I opened up the bottle and downed it in about an hour or so. The rest of the night was spent crying drunkenly, freaking out, bashing my head into the wall, and other such pleasantries. I have never felt as lonely in my life as I did that night. And of course, the following day, I woke up with a huge hangover, which passed in due time. I got on my motorcycle and I drove to my parents for dinner that day. My period of seclusion now ended. Story 25. 2 weeks ago, I went to an 11:15 p.m. showing of the final Hobbit movie. I was the only person in the theater. I spent 20 minutes finding the perfect seat, and I seriously contemplated asking them to pause the movie when I needed to go take a piss. As I walked out of the theater at almost 2 in the morning, there were no employees in sight. My car was the only one in the lot, and a light snow had recently fallen, which was completely undisturbed. As I was about halfway to my car, I turned around to look at the theater, and all the frontage and interior lights were off. It looked almost like it had been closed all along. Story 26. A year ago, I was stuck in Atlanta for Snowmageddon. I sat in traffic for 27 straight hours until they closed the exit I was taking when I was only about a half mile from it. I slept in my semi-truck that night, and when I woke up the next morning and went to start it, my engine had died. I sat in that truck for 4 days waiting for a tow. No food, no water, no cigarettes. Just melted snow to drink. On my birthday, some National Guard guys came and brought me some MREs. I had a scented candle, so I lit it. Heated a kind of pasta and a brownie thing while I sang myself happy birthday. It was a job I did for a year, and if you knew me, I'm not at all what you would expect a trucker to be like. A few months earlier, I'd been at the top of my game as a Peace Corps volunteer with friends and a great life. That year was the lowest I've ever been. That moment was the furthest I'd ever felt from myself. This year, I'm in Korea with a really good job, and I'm wanting to make up for how bad things were back then. So here's hoping. Edit. I actually have a picture of my lowest moment. Turns out, it wasn't a brownie, but a vanilla cake sort of thing, so it was at least somewhat of a birthday meal after all. Story 27. As a kid, I used to sit quietly in my room with my temple to the door handle. I was so alone. I sat there hoping my parents would open the door and just knock me out. Although fortunately, looking back, they never opened the door. This was a few years back, and I'm in a much better place now. It's not something I often bring up, but I'm glad that I can just let it out like this anonymously, and there's people who can support me. My parents weren't bad, but I kept everything to myself, so I don't think they had any idea. Mental health wasn't something people in my rural town really talked about or had to deal with before. So I don't think they even knew what was going on with me or would have known what to do if they did know. My advice, if you're in a bad place, talk to someone about it. If you have trouble in person, do like I did and talk to people who don't know you, like Reddit. Story 28. I was home alone on New Year's Eve, and I was playing The Sims in complete darkness. I had a small get-together with some of my other Sims, and as the bell fell, I whispered, "Happy New Year," to myself. It wasn't so bad, though. I'm more of a homebody who likes to be by myself and play video games anyway. And honestly, thinking back to it makes me laugh pretty hard. So that's it for today, guys. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and leave your story in the comments below. I'd love to do a video on them in the future. Plus, venting stuff like this is good for the soul. So, I hope you'll have a good rest of your day, and I will see you next time.